All right, so in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at how to create this cloudscape. And essentially what we're going to do is use the same setups that we've been creating, so the VDB setup that we set up before, along with a couple other setups, and then essentially use an instancing process to essentially scatter them all over and randomize them. Cool. So to get started, I got a fresh scene here, and essentially, instead of building this stuff from scratch, I just want to show you guys kind of like the power of Houdini when it comes to repurposing assets. So I got the Chapter 5 VDB set up. I'm going to go ahead and just open that, and then what we can do is take this exact setup and just copy and paste it over to a new Houdini session. So I'll just take this, Control C to copy, and then paste it over into a new session. It'll take a minute to cook. So we'll just let that go, and then we'll jump back to other scene, and then I'm going to grab another setup. So we'll grab our depth of volumetrics, and I'll go ahead and copy that one over as well. Cool. So we have two different setups ready to go right off the bat. Pretty simple. So from there, we can use an instancing workflow, and this will be a little bit of a recap if you did the randomization tutorial. I'm going to do tab and then type in instance. And essentially what an instance is essentially a way to duplicate an object without actually duplicating the object. It's going to be an instance of it, meaning there's not actually creating any more memory. It's just a reference to it. So what I'll do is in my instance node, I will go up to instance and I'll choose point instancing. I'll choose fast point instancing, and then I'll take my VDB cloud and go ahead and drag and drop it right up here. And then what we can see is we have another one just like that. So again, it's not actually copying it, it's just referencing it. So we don't have that much of a memory overhead right now. Gonna disable this one for a bit. So what if we actually want more of these, if we want to make like a landscape or something like that? So what we do from there is we can jump inside of here, and we'll notice that we have a single point that we work with. If we go up to our geometry spreadsheet, we have just one point. So this is point number 0 at 0, 0, 0. And essentially, all we have to do is make more points. And essentially, for every single point that Houdini finds, it's going to make a new instance for us. So if I do something like grid, and then I make that visible, and then I come up here, we'll see that we have a lot of those clouds. So even though it's not creating any like memory overhead, it does cost a lot on the GPU to actually display these things. So what we're going to do is, before we actually get deep into this instancing, we're going to create a proxy of this VDB cloud so that we can then use that to display, and then the volume will just be at render time thing. So how do we do that? We can jump into our VDB cloud, and then what we'll do is we'll do a VDB convert VDB. And then we see up here we have a convert to. We'll just change that over to polygons. We'll plug this in. You'll notice that it doesn't do anything. It's because we have our value set to 0 right now. So if we just go up on this a little bit, we should see something happen. And now we have some polygons to work with. We have things like adaptivity, which will essentially reduce the polygons on the side. So it's creating kind of like a pretty janky mesh, but for what we need, it's okay. We don't actually need quads for everything. So we can just boost that up to 2. Cool. And then from there, we can actually, since this is just going to be a viewport issue or a viewport thing, what we can do is just do a poly reduce on that as well. Going to plug that in. This will take a little bit to calculate, But what I'm going to do here is set this to 25. So percent to keep, so it's going to be keeping 25% of the geometry. And then this will be a really, really lightweight piece that we can then use to display in the viewport. So super snappy. And if we come back up to our instance, we'll see that, okay, now it's much, much more lightweight. I'm going to go ahead and save this in case it crashes on me. Cool. So let's work on making this a bit more organic. Before we do that, we have to actually make this not renderable. So we don't want to actually render this stuff. What we want to do is render the volume and then just have this displayed in the viewport. So we'll dive into the VDB cloud, and then what we'll do is on our volume density node, we'll right click that, go to flags and go under to render. And now we'll see we have two different circles happening. We have this blue one, and we have this purple one. So the blue is for what's going to be displayed in the viewport, and then the purple is going to be what's for displayed at render time. Awesome. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to my instance. I'm going to go ahead and zero this out. At this point in time, we can just disable this VDB cloud because we don't actually need that anymore. And now what we can do is go back into our instance, and then we can give us some more room on this grid. So we can do 150, 150. You'll notice that we're not actually seeing anything, and you'll notice we'll have to kind of dive inside and out of this to actually see anything. If you want to kind of work around that, what we can do is go up here to our pin, go ahead and click that, and then what that's going to do is make sure that everything, or make sure that this tab right here stays locked to the object level. So you'll see that we have this little path right here, our object level right there. This is going to change, this is going to change, but then this is going to be locked. So when we dive inside of here, you'll see that we jump into the instance right there, but not over here. So now what we can do is we can increase and decrease this. And we'll get more and more and more. You notice that I have some boxes that are showing them now. So instead of it actually showing them all, that's because if we go into our display options, if I go to geometry, it's going to still limit the point instancing right there. So it's going to just switch them over to boxes if it's essentially reaching that value. Cool. So I'll make my rows 50 and 50. This is just so we can get a little bit more resolution to play with, and I'm just going to disable that for now because I want to actually see what we're doing in here. So what I'm going to do next is I don't want to just scatter these evenly distributed along this. What we want to do is kind of create some waves, and the best way to do that is going to be the mountain stop, and then we can just plug that in, and you can see as we now play with the height, in the element size, so these are the two parameters we're going to be playing with the most. You'll see that we're now getting something that looks a little bit more organic, it's not so geometrical. And the values I'm going to use for this is going to be 15 and 60. Cool. And if we come back out to our object level, we'll see we're starting to get somewhere, but we need some more randomization. So I'll pin this, I'll jump back inside of here, and then the first thing that we can do is just randomize the scale. So we can drop in on a point. We'll plug that in. And then from there, what we'll do is go to P scale attribute right there. We'll do a random preset. And now we'll see that we got some random sizes happening. So next up, what we can do is randomize the positions. So right now they're all on this grid right here. What we can do is use a scatter node. So I'll unpin this and just do tab scatter and go ahead and plug that in. And now we'll see that we have a a more randomized distribution of the points. And we can scroll up and down, so we can come back here to object level. I'll pin that, and I'll dive back in. Now you'll see that we're gaining a lot more control. Cool. I'll leave this at a value of 2000. And the last thing that we want to do is we want to randomize the rotation. And I have a little digital asset that we can use to do that. So if we go to assets, install asset library, and then if we just navigate to OTLs into our project files, and then we'll choose RB rotate points, hit accept, and I'll just do install. And what that's going to do is install a brand new node for us to work with. If we hit tab right here and go up to digital assets, we have this rotate points node. So we'll just enable that, and then we'll drag and drop that, and we want to make sure that we put that before the points, or before the scatter. That's how this is designed to work. Now essentially we have this slider right here for how much randomization that we have. We can do things like along normals or vertical. So if we just want to do vertical rotation, I'm just going to do random because that's going to be the best thing for this. And the force total count, I just need to make sure that I set this to 2000. I'll go ahead and save. And at this point, it's a good time to just check out the render, see what we got. But before we do that, we need a shader. So I'm going to go to my shop level. I'm going to do RS volume. Or what we could do, instead of actually bringing it from here, what we can do is just go over to our file, our other file right here, and then what we can do is copy and paste these over. So we have our preset shader that's already set up, it's already connected, it's already good to go. For depth, so we'll just take this and Control C, and then I'll go over to my shop and I'll paste it, and I'll just label this to be depth, and then we'll go back and we'll open up the other scene, and then so VDB set up, and we'll grab that shader. Now what we can do is just copy and paste this, and then we'll just call this cloud. And then we'll just want to make sure that we turn off emission on this guy. So we'll leave that off. Cool, so now we can assign our shaders. We can go to object, we can go to VDB cloud, go to render, go to material, and then go down to shop, and then we'll just choose RS volume cloud. And then for our depth fog, what we'll do, it's already hooked up, so it actually linked up automatically when we copied and pasted it over, which is pretty great. It's the power of Houdini. Cool, so now I will add in a sunlight, so add RS sunlight. And it's going to be a little bit hard to see what direction this is facing because our scene scale is so massive. So what we can do here is go ahead and do icon scale, and we can set this up to 50. That'll just kind of allow us to see things a little bit better. And then we'll just want to make sure that we turn on volumetrics for this. So we'll go down, we'll do volumetric contribution scale being 1. And then we'll go over to our redshift node. So we'll need to create that. We'll do redshift, and then go here and then do redshift global illumination, and then just change this over to brute force and brute force. That'll just make sure that the actual sky is going to be illuminating things. I'll go ahead and hit I'll go ahead and frame this up, and then just do a control click on the camera. And then from there, what we can do is just make sure, I'm going to just go ahead and punch in on the focal length. So I'm going to set the focal length to 90. And then if we want to frame this up, we just hit lock, and we can move back like that. Cool. So I'll go ahead and save this. And then from there, what we can do is go to render view. Cool. So it took a little bit to build the scene. But essentially after the very first time. Cool. So here we are. It took a little bit long to fire up that first time. But after that, after you hit render, it should be able to fire up pretty quickly. Cool, so we're going to keep building on top of this. I'm just going to change my IPR over to half resolution scale so we can see this a little bit better. And then I'm just going to dramatically reduce my settings here. So I'll go to settings, we'll just change this to 1 and 4. And then I'll just hit my bucket rendering just to let this rip through really quick, and then we'll kind of see where we're at. Cool, so here's where we're at. Not too bad, but what we want to do is get a lot more different layers in here. So right now, all these are pretty small. So what I'm going to do is go up to my object level, and then what we can do with this instance is copy and paste this. And we can do a couple different layers of this. So we can have one that's kind of uniform and small and kind of overall, and then we have another one that is going to be used for larger. So we can dive inside of here and go to scatter. We're going to want to do a lot less than this, so we'll just do something like 10. And then in the point SOP, what we can do is just times this by a value of maybe like 2.5. And that'll just make it so that we have a couple more of these guys that are a little bit bigger. And then what we can do is come up here and copy and paste this again and do the same thing. So right now we're just creating a little bit more of an organic layout. So what we can do is go to scatter, and then instead of doing 10 this time, what we'll do is 3. And then this time we'll really kind of crank this up. So we'll do this times by 5. So now we have a couple ones that are really big. And if we want to kind of play with the layout here in terms of where these guys are located, we can easily just come in here and do a global seed and just kind of play around with this, because essentially this one is going to drive our composition a little bit more than the rest. So yeah, I'll just play around with this. Yeah, so not bad. Cool, so we want to now add in a couple different layers of just general atmosphere in the scene. And that's where our depth fog comes into play. So I'll go ahead and make sure this is zeroed out. And then what we can do is essentially scale this to match our scene. And then we can just kind of scale this up like this. So now we're starting to get like that vertical layer of atmosphere. And we can also move this down a little bit and kind of play with the scale. And we can really see that happening here. And if we want to, on top of that, to see this a little bit better, go to our display options. Whoops, for some reason my display options are not actually coming over my Houdini. So I'll just change my background down to dark so we can see this stuff a little bit better. Cool, so we'll give this another render, see where we're at. Cool, so we can see that our depth fog is a little too much. So what we can do is, I'm just going to go ahead and pause this. And then what we can do is just go back down to that shader. And then what we can do is go down a little bit on the scatter. So we can do something like 0.25 just so we can see through this a little bit better. Cool, so not too bad. The render settings right now are super low res, so we can't really see much. So if you want to do a higher render, you can just jump into your Redshift RAW and then go over to your settings. You can do something like 4 and maybe something like 128. Should be pretty clean. And then I had override IPR camera resolution, so you can just go ahead and disable that. This was the final result that I ended up with. I'll just show you guys over in Nuke. And I just put a little sky plate over the back of it. So there's that. Cool. So I'll just save this out for you guys. That's wrapping up for this lesson. And this will be Chapter 8, Cloudscape.